Blackwells Price. When her father was sentenced to death, Lady Isolde of Evermere had only one option: seek out Sir Aldrich Blackwell, the most ruthless knight in the realm. He studied her with a slow smirk, his voice dark with amusement. "You ask for my help, my lady," he murmured. "Tell me, how much of yourself are you willing to offer?" Chapter 1. The King's Decree. The parchment felt brittle in Isolde's trembling hands, the royal seal of King Oberon Stark, crimson blot against the cream. Each word, penned in the precise, unforgiving hand of the royal scribe, seemed to sear itself into her very soul. Treason. The word echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of her father's solar, a room that had always been a sanctuary of warmth and wisdom. Now it felt like a tomb. Lord Alaric of Evermere, her father, a man whose loyalty to the crown had been the bedrock of his life, stood accused of conspiring with the rebellious northern lords. The sentence, swift and brutal, was death. The execution was scheduled for the next full moon, a mere fortnight away. Isolde lowered the parchment, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Her father, seated by the hearth, seemed to have aged a decade in the span of a heartbeat. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the deep lines etched by worry and a lifetime of service. He had always been a pillar of strength, his hair the color of winter frost, his eyes the deep, steady blue of the Evermere Sea. Now, those eyes were clouded with a despair she had never witnessed. "Father," she whispered, the word a fragile plea. He looked up, a flicker of the old fire returning to his gaze. "Isolde, my brave girl." His voice, usually resonant and commanding, was hoarse with suppressed emotion. "There is little time. But the accusations, they are false, are they not?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. In the treacherous currents of King Oberon's court, truth was a luxury few could afford. Her father had made enemies, powerful ones, who had long coveted Evermere's strategic coastal lands and its rich silver mines. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight with a grim acceptance. "They are woven from lies and ambition, child. But proving that in the king's court it is a battle I cannot win." He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite the tremor that ran through him. "There is only one path, Isolde. One desperate hope." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Isolde knew what he was about to suggest, and the thought sent a chill through her veins, colder than the stone walls of Evermere Castle. "Sir Aldrich Blackwell," she breathed, the name itself a whispered curse in the polite circles of the court. The Black Lion, they called him. A knight of unparalleled skill and ruthlessness, a man whose loyalty was said to be purchased, not earned. He was a legend shrouded in darkness, a warrior whose blade had tasted the blood of kings and commoners alike. He was also, it was rumored, beholden to no one, save perhaps the glint of gold and the promise of power. Her father squeezed her hand. "He is a wolf, Isolde, dangerous and unpredictable, but he is also the only one who might be able to sway the king, or at least delay the inevitable." "But at what cost, father?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The stories of Blackwell's demands were infamous. He was said to take what he pleased, whether it be land, riches, or other things. He met her gaze, his blue eyes filled with a profound sadness. "The cost will be high, my daughter. But your life, your future, they are worth any price." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You must go to him, Isolde. You must plead for his intervention. Offer him whatever he desires." The weight of his words settled upon her, a crushing burden. She, Isolde of Evermere, a woman raised on principles of honor and duty, was to barter with a man who embodied neither. She was to offer herself, in whatever form he demanded, to save her father's life. She thought of her mother, buried these past 10 years beneath the ancient oak in Evermere's Godswood. Would she have understood? Would she have approved of such a desperate gamble? Isolde closed her eyes, drawing strength from the memory of her mother's gentle smile and unwavering spirit. "I will go, father," she said, her voice steadier now, fueled by a fierce determination. I will do whatever it takes. The journey to Blackwell's fortress, Blackhaven, was arduous. The roads were rough, the forests thick with shadows, and the air heavy with the threat of bandits and worse. Isolde traveled with a small escort of Evermere's most loyal guards, men who had served her father for decades. Sir Gareth, a grizzled veteran with a weathered face and a heart of gold, rode at her side, his presence a constant reassurance in the face of the unknown. They reached Blackhaven at dusk on the third day. The fortress was a formidable sight, perched atop a craggy cliff overlooking a turbulent sea. Its walls were black as night, seemingly hewn from the very rock itself. The Black Lion's banner, a snarling black lion rampant on a field of crimson, snapped in the wind, a stark warning to all who approached. As they rode through the massive gates, Isolde felt a tremor of fear, quickly suppressed. She had come this far. She would not falter now. She lifted her chin, her back straight, her blue eyes fixed ahead. She was Isolde of Evermere, and she would face the Black Lion with the courage of her ancestors. The courtyard was a hive of activity. Squires rushed to and fro, attending to horses and armor. Men-at-arms, clad in black and crimson, sharpened their swords and polished their shields. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, steel, and wood smoke. A tall, imposing figure emerged from the shadows of the keep. He was clad in black leather and steel, his movements fluid and powerful. His hair was as dark as the fortress walls, his eyes the color of polished obsidian. A cruel scar bisected his left eyebrow, giving his face a hard, dangerous edge. This was Sir Aldrich Blackwell. He stopped before her, his gaze sweeping over her with a slow, deliberate assessment that made her skin crawl. It was not a look of lust, but something colder, more calculating. He was measuring her, weighing her worth, just as he would a piece of land or a chest of gold. Lady Isolde of Evermere, he said, his voice a low, resonant drawl. To what do I owe the honor of this unexpected visit? The word honor dripped with a subtle mockery that sent a shiver down her spine. He knew why she was here. Isolde met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. I have come to seek your help, Sir Aldrich. A slow smirk spread across his lips, revealing a flash of white teeth. You ask for my help, my lady, he murmured, his voice dark with amusement. Tell me how much of yourself are you willing to offer? The unspoken question hung between them, a challenge and a threat, and Isolde knew that her answer would determine not only her father's fate, but her own. Chapter 2. A desperate plea. The air in the courtyard seemed to thicken, the sounds of the bustling activity fading into a muted hum as Isolde held Sir Aldrich Blackwell's gaze. His question, blunt and laced with a predatory undertone, hung between them like a drawn sword. She felt the eyes of his men upon her, curious, assessing, some even pitying. She knew her reputation, or at least the reputation of a noblewoman from a respected house, was already dissolving in the face of this bargain. Everything, she replied, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. I offer you everything I have, everything I am, in exchange for your intervention on my father's behalf. Blackwell raised a dark eyebrow, the scar above it crinkling slightly. He seemed almost disappointed. Everything? A generous offer, my lady. But everything can be a rather vague term. Be specific. Isolde swallowed, the dryness in her throat making it difficult to speak. She forced herself to meet his obsidian eyes, refusing to show any sign of weakness. Evermere's silver mines. A share of its coastal trade routes. My hand in marriage, if that is your desire. She listed the tangible assets, the things a man like Blackwell would understand value. But she knew, with a sickening certainty, that those were not the things he truly craved. He took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The scent of leather and steel, mingled with a faint, almost metallic tang that she instinctively associated with danger, filled her nostrils. Marriage? He purred, the word a silken whisper that sent a fresh wave of unease through her. A tempting offer, to be sure. But I have little need of a wife. Lady Isolde. Especially one who comes to me out of desperation, not affection. His gaze dropped, lingering for a moment on the delicate silver chain she wore around her neck, a chain that held a small, intricately carved locket, a gift from her mother, containing a miniature portrait of her father. It was the only piece of jewelry she wore, a tangible reminder of the family she was fighting to save. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the locket, sending a jolt of something akin to fear through her. "What I desire, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is something far more personal. Something that cannot be measured in gold or land." Isolde felt a tremor run through her. She knew what he was implying. He wanted her surrender, not just of her possessions, but of her pride, her dignity, her very self. He wanted to break her, to see her humbled and stripped bare, not just physically, but emotionally. She closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, gathering her strength. She had come this far. She would not flinch. She would not break. "Then name your price, Sir Aldrich," she said, opening her eyes and meeting his gaze with a newfound defiance. "And I will tell you whether I am willing to pay it." He studied her for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then a slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. "Very well, my lady. Let us retire to my solar. We have much to discuss." He turned and gestured for her to follow, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator leading its prey into its lair. Isolde followed, her steps measured and deliberate, though her mind raced. She had thrown down the gauntlet. Now, she had to face the consequences. The solar was a stark contrast to the bustling courtyard. It was a large, sparsely furnished room, dominated by a massive stone fireplace where a fire crackled merrily, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Tapestries depicting scenes of battle and conquest adorned the walls, a testament to Blackwell's brutal reputation. A large, heavy oak table stood in the center of the room, surrounded by several high-backed chairs. Blackwell gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs, while he took the seat at the head of the table, positioning himself as the one in control, the one dictating the terms. He poured 2 goblets of wine from a silver decanter, offering one to her. Isolde accepted it, though she had little desire for wine. She needed to keep her wits about her. "Now, Lady Isolde," he said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her, "let us speak plainly. Your father is accused of treason. A serious charge, one that carries the ultimate penalty. He is innocent," Isolde stated firmly, her voice ringing with conviction. "The accusations are false, fabricated by his enemies." Blackwell shrugged, a dismissive gesture that made her blood boil. "Innocence is a fragile shield in the king's court. Proof is what matters. And your father, it seems, lacks that crucial element. But you have influence," she pressed, her voice pleading now, despite her efforts to remain composed. "You can speak to the king. You can persuade him to reconsider." Blackwell swirled the wine in his goblet, his gaze never leaving hers. "I can. But why should I? What is Lord Alaric of Evermere to me?" "He is a loyal servant of the crown," she argued. "He has served the king faithfully for decades. Loyalty is a fleeting thing, my lady. It shifts with the winds of fortune. And right now, the winds are not blowing in your father's favor." Isolde felt a surge of despair. He was toying with her, enjoying her desperation. But she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I have offered you everything I have," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "What more do you want?" He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers, his expression intense and unwavering. "I want the truth, Lady Isolde. I want to know why you are truly here. I want to see past the facade of the noble lady, the dutiful daughter. I want to see the woman beneath, the woman who is willing to sacrifice everything for her father." His words struck her like a physical blow. He was stripping away her defenses, layer by layer, forcing her to confront the raw, vulnerable truth of her situation. She looked at him, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "I am here because I love my father," she said, her voice trembling. "Because he is the only family I have left. Because I would do anything at all, to save him. A flicker of something surprise? Respect? Crossed Blackwell's face. He had expected defiance, perhaps even tears, but not this raw, unfiltered honesty. He sat back in his chair, his gaze softening slightly. Anything? He repeated, the word a soft, probing question. Isolde nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Anything, she whispered. The word was a vow, a promise, a surrender. And in that moment, she knew that the bargain had been struck, not in words or deeds, but in the depths of her soul. The true cost remained to be seen, hanging heavy and unspoken in the firelit silence. Chapter 3. The Blackwells' Shadow. The silence that followed Isolde's whispered vow stretched, taut, and heavy with unspoken implications. The crackling fire in the hearth seemed to be the only sound in the room, each pop and hiss a punctuation mark to the unspoken bargain hanging between them. Blackwell studied her, his obsidian eyes no longer mocking, but filled with a curious intensity that was almost more unnerving. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and measured. Very well, Lady Isolde. You have offered anything. I will accept for now. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But know this, I do not make empty promises. If I intervene on your father's behalf, and I am successful, the price will be collected. And I am not a merciful man. Isolde nodded, her throat dry. She had expected no less. She had come prepared to offer everything, and she knew that Blackwell would demand nothing less than her complete surrender. What do you require of me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table, his gaze locking with hers. For now, your presence. You will remain here, at Blackhaven, as my guest. He emphasized the word guest with a subtle inflection that made it clear that her stay would be anything but voluntary. You will be treated with the respect to your station, but you will be under my protection and subject to my rules. Isolde felt a chill run down her spine. She was to be his prisoner, in all but name, trapped within the walls of his fortress, surrounded by his men, completely at his mercy. The thought was terrifying, yet she forced herself to remain calm. And what of my father? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. What assurance do I have that you will honor your part of the bargain? Blackwell smiled, a slow, chilling smile that did not reach his eyes. You have my word, Lady Isolde. And while my word may not mean much in the courts of the south, here in the north it is law. I will send word to King Oberon immediately, requesting a stay of execution and a re-examination of the evidence against your father. He paused, his gaze sharpening. But understand this. My influence is not unlimited. The king is a stubborn man, and your father's enemies are powerful. I can buy you time, perhaps even a chance at a fair trial. But I cannot guarantee his freedom. Isolde nodded, accepting the harsh reality of his words. A chance was all she could ask for. A glimmer of hope in the face of overwhelming despair. I understand, she said. And I will abide by your rules. He rose from his chair, his movements fluid and graceful. Good. Then let us begin. He walked towards a bell pull hanging near the fireplace and gave it a sharp tug. A moment later, a young woman entered the room, her eyes wide with curiosity. She was dressed in a simple, but well-made gown of dark blue, her hair neatly braided. This is Alara, Blackwell said, gesturing towards the woman. She will be your attendant. She will see to your needs and ensure that you are comfortable. Alara curtsied to Isolde, her expression respectful but wary. My lady, she murmured. Isolde forced a smile. Thank you, Alara. Blackwell turned back to Isolde. Alara will show you to your chambers. You will have time to rest and refresh yourself. We will dine together this evening, and then we will discuss the details of our arrangement. The unspoken threat hung in the air, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her situation. Isolde followed Alara out of the solar, her mind reeling. She was trapped, a pawn in a dangerous game, her fate hanging in the balance. The chambers assigned to her were surprisingly luxurious. A large, four-poster bed dominated the room, draped with heavy velvet curtains. A fire burned brightly in the hearth, chasing away the chill of the stone walls. A window, overlooking the sea, offered a breathtaking view of the turbulent waves crashing against the cliffs below. Alara busied herself, unpacking Isolde's meager belongings, laying out a fresh gown, and preparing a bath. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her movements graceful and unobtrusive. "Is there anything else you require, my lady?" she asked, her voice soft and deferential. Isolde shook her head. "No, thank you, Alara. This is more than I expected." Alara hesitated for a moment, then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir Aldrich, he is not always what he seems, my lady. He can be harsh, even cruel, but he is also just, in his own way." Isolde looked at her, surprised by the unexpected words of reassurance. "Thank you, Alara," she said. "I appreciate your honesty." Alara nodded and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Isolde sank onto the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the past few days wash over her. She was alone, in a strange and dangerous place, her future uncertain. But she was not broken. She was Isolde of Evermere, and she would survive. She would do whatever it took to save her father, even if it meant facing the darkness of the Black Lion's shadow and the unknown depths of the bargain she had struck. The weight of it all pressed down on her, but a flicker of defiance, of hope, still burned within her heart. Chapter 4. Terms of Surrender. The evening meal was a tense, silent affair. Isolde sat across from Blackwell at a long, polished table in a smaller dining hall, a room that felt more intimate, and therefore more dangerous, than the Grand Solar. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware against porcelain and the crackling of the fire in the hearth. 2 silent servants attended them, pouring wine and serving the various courses: roasted pheasant, spiced vegetables, and a rich, creamy custard. Isolde picked at her food, her appetite non-existent. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate Blackwell's next move, trying to prepare herself for whatever demands he might make. She had offered him everything, and she knew that he would not settle for a simple, straightforward agreement. Blackwell, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying his meal, savoring each bite with a deliberate slowness that only heightened Isolde's unease. He ate with a surprising elegance for a man known for his brutality, his movements precise and controlled. Finally, as the servants cleared the last of the dishes, he leaned back in his chair, his obsidian eyes fixed on her. "You are quiet, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur. "Are you regretting your bargain already?" Isolde met his gaze, forcing herself to remain composed. "I am a woman of my word, Sir Aldrich. I do not regret offering what I must to save my father's life." He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that did not reach his eyes. "Admirable. But words are cheap, my lady. Actions are what matter." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And now it is time for you to act." Isolde's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "What do you require of me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "As I said, you will remain here, at Blackhaven, as my guest. But your presence here will be more than just symbolic." He paused, his eyes flickering over her, assessing her reaction. "You will be my companion. You will attend me at court functions, accompany me on hunts, and share my table." Isolde felt a wave of relief wash over her. These were demands she could meet, duties she could perform. They were not the intimate concessions she had feared. "That is acceptable," she said, her voice gaining a measure of confidence. Blackwell raised a dark eyebrow. "Acceptable? My lady, you wound me. I had hoped for enthusiasm." He chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "But I suppose I can settle for compliance. For now." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "But there is more, Lady Isolde. Much more." He reached into a small pouch at his belt and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, sealed with his personal crest, the Black Lion Rampant. He slid the parchment across the table towards her. "This is a contract, my lady. A formal agreement outlining the terms of our arrangement." Isolde picked up the parchment, her hands trembling slightly. She broke the seal and unfolded the document, her eyes scanning the precisely written words. The contract was detailed and specific, outlining her duties as his companion, her restrictions within Blackhaven, and her obligations to him. It stipulated that she would obey his commands, maintain a discreet silence regarding their agreement, and refrain from any contact with other men. The last clause sent a jolt of anger through her. It was a blatant attempt to control her, to isolate her completely. "This is unacceptable," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I am not your property, Sir Aldrich. I will not be treated as such." Blackwell leaned back in his chair, his expression unyielding. "You are my guest, Lady Isolde, and as such, you are under my protection. And my protection comes with conditions. Conditions that strip me of my freedom, my dignity," she retorted, her voice laced with defiance. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that made her blood boil. "Freedom is an illusion, my lady. We are all bound by something: duty, honor, loyalty, or, in your case, a bargain struck in desperation." Isolde glared at him, her anger simmering. She wanted to tear up the contract, to refuse his demands, to walk away. But she knew she couldn't. Her father's life hung in the balance. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain control. "I will sign the contract," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "But I will not be a prisoner, Sir Aldrich. I will retain my dignity, my sense of self. And I will hold you to your word. You will do everything in your power to save my father." Blackwell smiled, a genuine smile this time, one that reached his eyes. "Very well, Lady Isolde. You have spirit. I admire that." He paused, his gaze softening slightly. "I am not a monster, despite what you may have heard. I am a man of my word, and I will honor our agreement." He offered her a quill and a small pot of ink. Isolde took the quill, her hand steady now, fueled by a fierce determination. She signed her name at the bottom of the contract, the ink a stark black against the cream parchment. As she handed the contract back to him, their fingers brushed, sending a jolt of something akin to electricity through her. It was a fleeting touch, but it was enough to remind her of the power he held over her, the intimacy of the bargain they had struck. He folded the contract and placed it back in his pouch. "Then it is settled, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice low and resonant. "You are now under my protection, and I am at your service." The last phrase was spoken with a subtle inflection that was both a promise and a threat. The terms were set, the surrender made. The true test, she knew, was only just beginning. Chapter 5. Evermere's Farewell. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the sea a churning mass of white caps mirroring the turmoil in Isolde's heart. A raven had arrived during the night, bearing a message from Sir Gareth, her father's loyal captain. The king had granted a stay of execution, as Blackwell had promised, but the trial was set for a month's time, in the capital city of Oakhaven. Lord Alaric remained imprisoned, his fate still uncertain. Isolde clutched the letter in her hand, the parchment crinkling with the force of her grip. A month. It was both a reprieve and a torment. A month to hope, a month to fear, a month to live under Blackwell's watchful gaze. She had requested permission to visit Evermere, to see her father before he was taken to Oakhaven. Blackwell had granted her request, with the condition that she be accompanied by a detachment of his own men, led by his second-in-command, a stern, silent knight named Sir Callan. The journey back to Evermere was a stark contrast to the journey she had made just a few days before. Then, she had been filled with a desperate hope, a belief that she could somehow avert the disaster looming over her family. Now, she was returning with a heavy heart, burdened by the weight of the bargain she had struck, the uncertainty of her future. As Evermere Castle came into view, rising majestically from the cliffs overlooking the sea, a wave of emotion washed over Isolde. It was her home, the place where she had spent her childhood, the place where she had known love and laughter and security. Now, it felt like a distant memory, a dream fading with the harsh light of reality. The gates of Evermere opened to admit her, the familiar faces of the guards and servants etched with worry and relief. They had heard the news of the king's day of execution, but they also knew the price Isolde had paid. She found her father in Isolar, the same room where she had received the king's decree. He was thinner, paler, but his eyes still held that spark of defiance, that unwavering spirit that had always been his hallmark. He rose from his chair as she entered, embracing her tightly. "Isolde, my brave girl," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You should not have done this. You should not have sacrificed yourself for me." Isolde held him close, drawing strength from his presence. "I did what I had to, father," she said, "and I would do it again." They spent the next few hours together, talking, reminiscing, trying to find comfort in each other's presence. Isolde told him about Blackwell, about the bargain she had struck, about her fears and her hopes. He listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and support, his love for her unwavering. He revealed the name of the one who betrayed him, Lord Valerius, a long-time rival, a man hungry for Evermere's land. He spun a web of lies. Documents. Witnesses. All false, but enough to sway the king's easily influenced mind. Her father explained with a bitter shake of his head. As the time for her departure drew near, Isolde walked with her father to the Godswood, the sacred grove where her mother was buried. They stood beneath the ancient oak, its branches reaching towards the sky like supplicating arms. "Your mother would have been proud of you, Isolde," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always said you had her spirit, her strength." Isolde leaned against the tree, feeling the rough bark against her cheek. "I miss her, father," she whispered. "I wish she were here." He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle and reassuring. "She is here, Isolde. In your heart, in your memories, in the very air we breathe." They stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound the rustling of the leaves and the distant roar of the sea. Then, Isolde turned to her father, her eyes filled with tears. "I must go," she said, her voice trembling. "But I will not forget you, father. I will fight for you. I will do everything in my power to bring you home." He embraced her one last time, his hug fierce and protective. "Be careful, my daughter," he whispered. "Blackwell is a dangerous man. Do not trust him completely." Isolde nodded, her heart heavy with a mixture of love, fear, and determination. She kissed her father's cheek, then turned and walked away, her steps slow and reluctant. Sir Calin and his men were waiting for her at the gates. She mounted her horse, her gaze fixed on Evermere Castle, her home, her sanctuary. As she rode away, she knew that she was leaving a part of herself behind, a part that she might never fully recover. But she also knew that she was carrying with her a new strength, a new resolve, forged in the crucible of sacrifice and love. She would face whatever lay ahead, whatever Blackwell demanded of her, with the courage of her ancestors and the unwavering hope of a daughter fighting for her father's life. The farewell was bittersweet, a poignant goodbye to the life she knew, and a hesitant step towards an uncertain future. Chapter 6. The Whispers of Court. Blackhaven, upon Isolde's return, felt even more like a gilded cage. The initial shock of her surroundings had worn off, replaced by a gnawing sense of confinement. While her chambers were comfortable and Ilara remained a quiet, helpful presence, the weight of Blackwell's presence and the contract that bound her was a constant, suffocating pressure. The whispers started almost immediately. The servants, the guards, even the visiting merchants who came to Blackhaven to trade they all knew, or at least they thought they knew. Lady Isolde of Evermere, the noblewoman who had come to the Black Lion seeking his aid, was now his what? His mistress? His prisoner? His prize? Isolde tried to ignore the stares, the hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when she entered a room, the subtle smirks and knowing glances. She held her head high, maintaining a facade of composure, but inside, she seethed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Blackwell, for his part, seemed oblivious to the gossip, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He treated her with a cool courtesy in public, addressing her formally, offering her small, polite gestures of respect. But there was always a hint of something else in his eyes, a possessive gleam that reminded her of her precarious position. He began to include her in his daily routine, as the contract stipulated. She accompanied him on his morning rides. The powerful black stallion he rode a stark contrast to her own smaller, gentler mare. She sat beside him at meals, listening to his discussions with his advisors, learning about the complex web of alliances and rivalries that govern the northern lands. She even attended him at a small gathering of local lords, a test of her composure and her ability to play the role he had assigned her. The lords were curious, of course. They had heard the rumors, and they were eager to see the woman who had captured the Black Lion's attention. They treated her with a polite deference, but Isolde could sense their underlying speculation, their questions unspoken but ever present. One lord, in particular, a man named Lord Edric, seemed particularly interested in her. He was a younger man, handsome and charming, with a reputation for being a bit of a rogue. He engaged her in conversation, his eyes lingering on her face, his voice laced with a subtle flattery. Isolde responded politely, but cautiously, mindful of the clause in the contract that forbade her from any contact with other men. She knew that Blackwell was watching, his gaze never far from her, and she did not want to give him any reason to doubt her compliance. Later that evening, as they were walking back to her chambers, Blackwell spoke, his voice low and laced with a hint of steel. "Lord Edric seems to find you intriguing, Lady Isolde." Isolde kept her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to meet his eyes. "He was merely being polite, Sir Aldrich." Blackwell chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Polite? Perhaps. But I do not tolerate rivals, my lady. Remember our agreement." Isolde stopped, turning to face him, her anger flaring. "I am not a prize to be won or lost, Sir Aldrich. I am a woman, with my own thoughts and feelings, and I will not be treated as a possession." He stepped closer, his presence dominating, his eyes locking with hers. "You are under my protection, Lady Isolde, and that protection comes with expectations. You will do well to remember that." His words were a threat, a reminder of the power he held over her. But Isolde refused to be intimidated. She met his gaze, her chin lifted, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I will honor my part of the bargain, Sir Aldrich," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "But I will not be broken. I will not lose myself in this arrangement." He studied her for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then, a flicker of something respect, admiration, crossed his face. "We shall see, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice softening slightly. "We shall see." He turned and continued walking, leaving Isolde standing there, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had stood up to him, defied him, even if only in a small way. But she knew that the battle for her spirit, for her very self, was far from over. The whispers of the court were a constant reminder of her vulnerability, but they also fueled her determination to survive, to remain true to herself, even in the heart of Blackhaven's darkness. She would play the role he had assigned her, but she would not let him control her soul. That, at least, was still her own. Chapter 7. A Night's Scrutiny. The days that followed settled into a strange, unsettling routine. Isolde found herself constantly under Blackwell's scrutiny, his obsidian eyes following her every move, assessing her every word, her every gesture. It was as if he were trying to peel back the layers of her composure, to see the woman beneath the facade of the noble lady. He tested her, subtly at first, then with increasing boldness. He questioned her about her past, her upbringing, her beliefs. He challenged her opinions, debated her views, pushed her to defend her convictions. He seemed determined to find her breaking point, the point at which she would crack under the pressure. But Isolde refused to break. She had learned, growing up in the often treacherous world of court politics, to control her emotions, to present a calm, composed exterior, even when her insides were churning with turmoil. She answered his questions honestly, but carefully, revealing only what she chose to reveal, guarding her inner self with a fierce protectiveness. He took her hunting, a skill she had learned from her father, though she had always preferred the company of her books to the thrill of the chase. Blackwell watched her as she handled her bow, her movements precise and graceful, her aim true. He seemed impressed, though he said little, his expression unreadable. He also began to teach her swordplay, a skill that was considered unusual for a woman of her station. He said it was for her own protection, a necessary precaution in the dangerous world they inhabited. But Isolde suspected there was more to it than that. He wanted to see her strength, her resilience, her willingness to fight. The training sessions were grueling. Blackwell was a demanding teacher, relentless in his pursuit of perfection. He pushed her to her limits, correcting her stance, her grip, her every move. He spared her no mercy, treating her as he would any other novice, regardless of her noble birth. Isolde, despite her initial reluctance, found herself drawn to the challenge. The physical exertion was a welcome release from the constant mental strain of her situation. And there was a strange satisfaction in mastering a new skill, in proving to herself, and to Blackwell, that she was more than just a pawn in his game. One afternoon, during a particularly intense training session, Isolde managed to disarm Blackwell, a feat that surprised both of them. He stood there for a moment, his sword lying at his feet, his expression a mixture of shock and amusement. "Well done, Lady Isolde," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "You are a quick learner." Isolde, flushed with exertion and a sense of accomplishment, returned his smile. "Thank you, Sir Aldrich. I have a good teacher." For a fleeting moment, the tension between them seemed to dissipate, replaced by a shared sense of something else. A connection, perhaps. A mutual respect. But the moment was short-lived. Blackwell retrieved his sword, his expression hardening. "Do not become complacent, my lady," he said, his voice regaining its usual edge. "One victory does not win a war." The training continued, but the dynamic between them had shifted subtly. Blackwell's scrutiny remained, but it was no longer solely focused on finding her weaknesses. He seemed to be genuinely interested in her abilities, in her potential. He started to include her in his strategic discussions, seeking her opinion on matters of trade, defense, and diplomacy. He listened to her advice, often incorporating her suggestions into his plans. He was still the Black Lion, the ruthless warlord, but he was also showing her a different side of himself, a side that was intelligent, perceptive, and surprisingly thoughtful. Isolde, in turn, began to see past his harsh exterior, to glimpse the man beneath the armor. She saw his dedication to his people, his unwavering loyalty to his men, his fierce determination to protect his lands. She saw his loneliness, his isolation, the burden of command that he carried on his shoulders. She still feared him, of course. She still resented the control he had over her. But she was also starting to understand him, to respect him, even to admire him. It was a dangerous, unsettling realization, one that she tried to suppress, but it was there, growing stronger with each passing day. The knight's scrutiny was revealing more than just her strengths and weaknesses. It was revealing the complexities of the man behind the Black Lion persona and stirring a confusing mix of emotions within her. The line between captive and companion was becoming increasingly blurred. Chapter 8. The Price of Freedom. A month had passed since Isolde's arrival at Blackhaven, a month of strained interactions, subtle tests, and a growing, unsettling awareness between her and Blackwell. The date of her father's trial in Oakhaven was fast approaching, and the tension in the fortress was palpable. Blackwell had been true to his word. He had sent missives to King Oberon, leveraging his considerable influence to secure a more favorable hearing for Lord Alaric. He had also dispatched his own investigators to Evermere, seeking evidence to counter the accusations against her father. But the news from Oakhaven was not encouraging. Lord Valerius, her father's accuser, had been busy consolidating his power, swaying the king's advisors, and planting seeds of doubt in the minds of the court. The trial, it seemed, was more of a formality, a predetermined outcome designed to legitimize Valerius's claim to Evermere. Isolde felt a growing sense of despair. She had done everything she could, sacrificed everything she had, but it seemed it was not enough. Her father's fate was still hanging in the balance, and she was powerless to change it. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Blackwell summoned her to his solar. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his figure silhouetted against the fading light. The room was dimly lit, the only source of illumination the flickering flames in the hearth. "The news from Oakhaven is not good, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice low and somber. "Your father's chances are slim." Isolde felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words spoken aloud made it all the more real, all the more devastating. What can be done?" she asked, her voice trembling. He turned to face her, his expression grave. "There is one possibility. A desperate gamble, but perhaps our only hope." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "I can go to Oakhaven myself. I can speak to the king directly, appeal to his sense of justice, his sense of reason." Isolde's heart leaped with a flicker of hope. Blackwell's presence at the trial could make a difference. He was a powerful figure, respected and feared throughout the realm. His words would carry weight. "But?" she asked, sensing the unspoken caveat. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "But my intervention will come at a price, Lady Isolde. A price far greater than what we have already agreed upon." Isolde's blood ran cold. She knew what he was implying. He was talking about more than just political maneuvering. He was talking about her. What price?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, sending a shiver through her. "The king is a fickle man, Lady Isolde. He is easily swayed by appearances. He needs to believe that I am fully committed to your father's cause, that I am personally invested in his well-being." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "He needs to believe that you are mine, Lady Isolde. Not just my guest, not just my companion, but my woman. In every sense of the word." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Isolde felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This was the price he had hinted at, the ultimate sacrifice he demanded. He wanted her to surrender completely, not just her freedom, but her body, her very self. He was not asking, he was stating the terms. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the image of what he was asking, trying to find some shred of dignity, some semblance of control. But she knew she had no choice. Her father's life depended on it. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that made her blood boil. "Then your father will die, Lady Isolde. It is as simple as that." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a mixture of anger, despair, and resignation. "You are a cruel man, Sir Aldrich," she whispered. He smiled, a cold, mirthless smile. "Full? Perhaps. But also pragmatic. I am offering you a choice, Lady Isolde. Your father's life, or your virtue. Which will you choose?" Isolde looked at him, her heart aching with a pain she had never known before. She had come to Blackhaven seeking his help, offering him everything she had. And now he was demanding the one thing she had sworn to protect, the one thing that was truly her own. But she knew what she had to do. She had made a bargain, a vow, and she would honor it, even if it meant sacrificing everything. "I will do it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I will be yours, Sir Aldrich." In every sense of the word. He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Then it is settled, Lady Isolde," he said, his voice low and resonant. "The price of freedom is steep, but it is a price we are both willing to pay." The agreement was sealed, not with a contract, but with a surrender, a sacrifice. The price of her father's freedom was her own, a devastating reality that settled upon her like a shroud. Chapter 9. Beneath the Armor. The journey to Oakhaven was a blur of muted landscapes and strained silences. Isolde traveled with Blackwell and his retinue, a large, imposing force that drew stares and whispers wherever they went. She rode beside him, her presence a calculated display of their alliance. He treated her with a possessive courtesy, his hand often resting on her arm, his gaze lingering on her face, a clear message to anyone who dared to question their relationship. But beneath the surface of their carefully constructed facade, a storm of emotions raged. Isolde felt a mixture of shame, resentment, and a strange, unsettling sense of anticipation. She had agreed to become his lover, to surrender her body to him in exchange for her father's life. It was a bargain she had made willingly, but it was also a violation, a betrayal of her own self. Blackwell, for his part, remained an enigma. He was attentive, solicitous, even tender at times. He seemed to anticipate her needs, to understand her fears, to offer her small gestures of comfort. But there was always a distance between them, a wall that she could not penetrate. He was playing a role, just as she was, and she could not tell where the performance ended and the man began. They arrived in Oakhaven on the eve of the trial. The capital city was a sprawling metropolis, a chaotic mix of grand palaces, bustling marketplaces, and squalid slums. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, spices, and unwashed bodies. The streets were crowded with people from all walks of life: nobles, merchants, soldiers, beggars, and thieves. Blackwell had secured lodgings for them in a luxurious inn, a place frequented by wealthy merchants and visiting dignitaries. Their suite of rooms was opulent, decorated with rich tapestries, fine furniture, and a large, four-poster bed that dominated the main chamber. Isolde felt a wave of unease as she entered the room. This was where it would happen. This was where she would fulfill her part of the bargain. Blackwell seemed to sense her apprehension. He placed a hand on her arm, his touch gentle but firm. "Are you all right, Lady Isolde?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. She forced a smile, trying to mask her inner turmoil. "I am fine, Sir Aldrich. Just tired." He nodded, his gaze searching her face. "Rest then. We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow." He left her alone in the chamber, giving her time to prepare herself, both physically and mentally. Isolde bathed, changed into a simple but elegant gown, and brushed her hair, her movements mechanical, her mind numb. She felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by forces beyond her control. As darkness fell, Blackwell returned. He was dressed in a fine tunic of black velvet, his only adornment a silver chain bearing the crest of the Black Lion. He looked different, less imposing, perhaps even vulnerable. He poured 2 goblets of wine, offering one to her. Isolde accepted it, her hand trembling slightly. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Then Blackwell spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "Isolde, I know this is not what you wanted. I know this is difficult for you." She looked at him, surprised by the unexpected note of empathy in his voice. "You gave me no choice, Sir Aldrich," she said, her voice laced with a hint of bitterness. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Perhaps not. But I want you to know, I do not take this lightly. I do not relish your surrender." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "I have lived a life of war, of violence, of taking what I wanted. But I am not a monster, Isolde. I do not enjoy causing pain." His words struck her like a physical blow. He was revealing a vulnerability, a glimpse of the man beneath the armor, the man she had begun to suspect existed, but had never truly seen. She took a step closer, her gaze searching his face. "Then why, Sir Aldrich? Why are you doing this?" He looked at her, his obsidian eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions: desire, regret, and something else, something she could not quite decipher. "Because I need you, Isolde," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not just for your father, not just for the king, but for myself." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch sending a shiver through her. "I have been alone for a long time, Isolde. Surrounded by enemies, by sycophants, by people who fear me, but do not know me." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "But you see me, Isolde. You see past the Black Lion, past the warrior, past the monster. You see the man beneath." His words resonated with her, echoing her own growing understanding of him. She had seen his loneliness, his isolation, the burden he carried. She had seen his strength, his intelligence, his unexpected tenderness. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "And I am starting to see you, Sir Aldrich," she whispered. "Perhaps more clearly than you know." He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, questioning touch. Isolde closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. This was not the forced submission she had expected, the brutal claiming of his prize. This was something else, something more. She responded to his kiss, her lips parting beneath his, her body softening against his. It was a kiss of surrender, yes, but also a kiss of acceptance. A kiss of beginning. The armor was, for a moment, shed, revealing the vulnerable, complex man beneath. And in that moment, Isolde realized that the price of freedom might not be as devastating as she had feared. It might, in fact, be the beginning of something unexpected, something profound. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Past. The night was a tapestry woven with tenderness and a surprising vulnerability. Blackwell, stripped of his usual armor and his guarded demeanor, revealed a depth of feeling Isolde had only glimpsed before. He was gentle, patient, his touch hesitant at first, as if unsure of how to navigate this new, uncharted territory. Isolde, in turn, found herself responding to him in ways she had not anticipated. The fear and resentment she had harbored were still present, but they were tempered by a growing understanding, a burgeoning empathy for the man who had, in his own way, become as much a captive of circumstance as she was. They spoke little, their communication more physical than verbal. The unspoken words, the shared glances, the lingering touches, these were the threads that wove their connection, a connection forged in desperation, but now blossoming into something more. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, painting the room in soft hues of gray and rose, Isolde lay in Blackwell's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She felt a strange sense of peace, a tranquility she had not expected to find in this situation. Blackwell stirred, his arms tightening around her. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his touch lingering. "Are you all right, Isolde?" he asked, his voice still husky with sleep. She nodded, her cheek rubbing against the soft linen of his tunic. "Yes," she whispered. "Better than I thought I would be." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, transforming his usually stern features. "I am glad," he said. "I did not want to hurt you." Isolde looked up at him, her gaze searching his face.
"You didn't," she said.
"You were kind." He chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver through her.
"Kind?"
"That is not a word often associated with the Black Lion." "Perhaps it should be," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Perhaps there is more to you than the world sees." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he sighed, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to carry the weight of years, of battles fought, of losses endured. "There are ghosts, Isolde," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Echoes of the past that haunt me still." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the window, as if looking at something far away, something only he could see. "I was not always this," he said, his voice laced with a hint of bitterness. "I was once different. Younger, more idealistic, perhaps even hopeful." Isolde, intrigued, propped herself up on one elbow, her gaze fixed on his face. "What happened?" she asked, her voice gentle and encouraging. He hesitated for a moment, as if reluctant to share his secrets, to reveal his vulnerabilities. Then, he began to speak, his voice low and measured, his words painting a picture of a past she had never imagined. He spoke of his childhood, of a loving mother, a stern but fair father, a younger brother he had adored. He spoke of his training as a knight, his early battles, his first taste of victory and loss. He spoke of a woman he had loved deeply, a woman who had been betrothed to him since childhood. Her name was Lyra. She had hair of spun gold and eyes of the summer sky. "She was everything to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My light, my hope, my future." But Lyra had been taken from him, a victim of a raid by a rival clan, a casualty of the endless cycle of violence that plagued the northern lands. He had found her body, broken and lifeless, in the aftermath of the attack. He paused and closed his eyes. Isolde could feel the pain radiating from his being. "I changed that day, Isolde," he said, his voice raw with grief. "I hardened my heart. I swore vengeance. I became the Black Lion, the warrior, the monster." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with a look of profound sadness. "I have lived with that darkness ever since, Isolde. It has consumed me, shaped me, made me what I am." Isolde reached out, placing a hand on his cheek, her touch gentle and compassionate. "I am sorry, Aldrich," she whispered. "I am so sorry for your loss." He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing again. "Thank you, Isolde," he said. "Your understanding means more to me than you know." They lay in silence for a long moment, the weight of his past, his grief, hanging heavy in the air. But there was also a sense of release, a feeling that by sharing his pain, he had somehow lightened the burden he carried. The echoes of the past had been revealed, the source of his darkness, his ruthlessness, his loneliness. And in sharing them with Isolde, he had taken the first step towards healing, towards finding a way back to the light. It was a fragile hope, a tentative beginning, but it was there, a spark of something new, something profound, flickering between them. The shared vulnerability had forged a deeper connection, a bond that went beyond the bargain, beyond the roles they were playing. It was a connection of two souls, scarred by the past, but reaching for a future they might, just might, be able to build together. Chapter 11. A Dance of Deception. The day of the trial dawned gray and ominous, the sky mirroring the mood in Oakhaven. The city was abuzz with anticipation, the streets filled with people eager to witness the spectacle of Lord Alaric's judgment. The king's court was a grand, imposing hall, filled with nobles, officials, and curious onlookers. Isolde, dressed in a gown of deep blue velvet, stood beside Blackwell, her presence a carefully calculated statement. He had instructed her to be demure, yet regal, to project an image of both innocence and devotion. He wanted the king and the court to believe that she was completely under his control, that her loyalty to her father had been supplanted by her affection for him. It was a dance of deception, a performance designed to sway the king's fickle judgment. Isolde played her part flawlessly, her every gesture, her every glance, carefully calibrated to convey the message Blackwell desired. She kept her gaze lowered, her expression submissive, but beneath the surface, her mind raced, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Lord Alaric was brought into the hall, his hands bound, his figure gaunt but unbowed. He looked at Isolde, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She offered him a small, reassuring smile, a silent promise that she would not give up, that she would fight for him until the very end. Lord Valerius, her father's accuser, stood opposite him, his face smug and confident. He presented his case with a smooth, practiced eloquence, weaving a web of lies and half-truths designed to paint Lord Alaric as a traitor to the crown. He produced forged documents, bribed witnesses, and manipulated evidence to support his claims. Isolde listened in silence, her anger simmering beneath her carefully controlled exterior. She wanted to scream, to denounce Valerius for the liar he was, to expose his treachery to the court. But she knew she could not. She had to play her part, to maintain the facade of the devoted lover, to let Blackwell work his influence. Blackwell, for his part, remained silent throughout Valerius's presentation, his expression unreadable. He watched the king, gauging his reactions, assessing his mood, waiting for the opportune moment to intervene. Finally, after Valerius had finished his lengthy accusation, the king turned to Blackwell, his gaze curious and expectant. "Sir Aldrich," he said, his voice booming through the hall, "you have remained silent throughout this proceeding. Do you have anything to say on behalf of Lord Alaric?" Blackwell rose from his seat, his movements fluid and graceful. He approached the king, his gaze unwavering. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice low and resonant. I have listened carefully to the accusations against Lord Alaric, and I find them lacking. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The evidence presented is circumstantial, based on hearsay and conjecture. There is no concrete proof of Lord Alaric's guilt. He turned to face the court, his gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles. Lord Alaric is a man of honor, a loyal servant of the crown. He has served this kingdom faithfully for decades. To condemn him based on such flimsy evidence would be a grave injustice. He then turned his attention back to the king, his gaze softening slightly. Your Majesty, I understand your concerns. You must protect your realm from treason. But I urge you to reconsider your judgment. I urge you to look beyond the accusations, to see the man, the loyal servant, the father. He gestured towards Isolde, his hand resting possessively on her arm. I have taken Lady Isolde under my protection. I have come to know her, to care for her, and I believe her when she says her father is innocent. His words were carefully chosen, designed to appeal to the king's vanity, his sense of chivalry, his weakness for a beautiful woman. He was using Isolde, using their relationship, as a tool to sway the king's judgment. Isolde felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She was grateful for his intervention, for his defense of her father. But she also resented the way he was using her, manipulating her, turning her into a pawn in his game. The king appeared confused. Blackwell's reputation made the display surprising. The king hesitated, his gaze flickering between Blackwell and Isolde. He seemed swayed by Blackwell's words, by the image of the powerful Black Lion vouching for the accused traitor. Very well, Sir Aldrich, the king said, his voice uncertain. I will reconsider. I will grant Lord Alaric a stay of execution, pending further investigation. A collective gasp went through the hall. The king's decision was unexpected, a victory, however small, for Blackwell and Isolde. Lord Valerius, furious at this turn of events, protested vehemently, but the king silenced him with a wave of his hand. The matter is settled, the king declared. Lord Alaric will remain in custody, but he will not be executed. I will appoint a royal commission to investigate the charges against him further. The trial was over for now. Lord Alaric had been spared, but his fate was still uncertain. The dance of deception had worked, but it had also come at a cost. Isolde had played her part, but she had also been used, manipulated, her emotions exploited for Blackwell's strategic gain. The victory was bittersweet, a temporary reprieve in a battle that was far from over. The charade had been successful, but the emotional toll was heavy, leaving Isolde with a mix of relief for her father and a deep unease about the nature of her relationship with Blackwell. Chapter 12. The Tournament of Lies. The king's decision to stay Lord Alaric's execution sent ripples of shock and speculation through the court. To celebrate the reconciliation and to further solidify the perception of his alliance with Blackwell, King Oberon announced a grand tournament, a spectacle of martial prowess and courtly intrigue. Blackwell, of course, was expected to participate, and he accepted the challenge with his usual cool confidence. Isolde, as his companion, was expected to be at his side, a visible symbol of their union. The tournament was more than just a display of skill and strength. It was a political arena, a stage for power plays and hidden agendas. The nobles of the realm, eager to curry favor with the king, vied for his attention, their every move, their every word, carefully calculated to advance their own interests. Isolde found herself thrust into the heart of this treacherous world, a world of whispers, rumors, and veiled threats. She was surrounded by enemies, by rivals, by people who envied her position, who resented her influence over Blackwell. She had to be constantly on her guard, mindful of her every word, her every gesture. She had to maintain the facade of the devoted lover, while also navigating the complex web of courtly etiquette, trying to discern friend from foe, truth from lie. Blackwell, for his part, seemed to revel in the attention and the challenge. He was in his element, a warrior among warriors, a master of the game. He treated Isolde with a possessive courtesy, his hand often resting on her arm, his gaze lingering on her face, a clear message to anyone who dared to question their relationship. But beneath the surface, Isolde sensed a tension in him, a restlessness that belied his confident exterior. He was playing a dangerous game, and he knew it. He was walking a tightrope, balancing his loyalty to Isolde and her father with his own ambitions, his own desires. The tournament itself was a brutal affair, a test of skill, strength, and endurance. Knights from across the realm competed in a series of events: jousting, sword fighting, archery, each vying for the coveted title of champion. Blackwell, as expected, dominated the competition. He was a formidable opponent, his skills honed by years of battle, his movements fluid and powerful, his strikes precise and deadly. He unhorsed his opponents in the joust, disarmed them in the sword fight, and outshot them in the archery competition. Isolde watched him from the royal box, her heart pounding with a mixture of pride, fear, and something else. She was witnessing the Black Lion in his full glory, the warrior, the legend, the man who had captured her, body and soul. But she also saw the toll the tournament was taking on him. He was tiring, his movements becoming less fluid, his strikes less precise. He was pushing himself to his limits, driven by a fierce determination to win, to prove himself, to protect her. During one particularly brutal jousting match, Blackwell was unhorsed by a young, ambitious knight named Sir Kester. It was a shocking upset, a moment of vulnerability that sent a wave of fear through Isolde. Blackwell lay on the ground for a moment, stunned and winded. Isolde rushed to his side, her heart in her throat. "Are you all right, Aldrich?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. He looked up at her, his eyes dazed. He struggled to his feet, his body bruised and aching. "I am fine," he said, his voice strained. "Just a bit shaken." He insisted on continuing the tournament, despite Isolde's pleas for him to withdraw. He was determined to prove that he was still the Black Lion, the invincible warrior. But the fall had taken its toll. He lost the next round of the sword fight, a defeat that shocked the entire court. He was no longer the favorite to win the tournament. Isolde saw the anger, the frustration, the shame in his eyes. He had been humiliated, his reputation tarnished, his dominance challenged. That evening, as they were preparing for bed, Isolde approached him cautiously. "Aldrich," she said, her voice soft and concerned. "You should have withdrawn. You were injured." He turned to face her, his expression dark and brooding. "I am not weak, Isolde," he said, his voice laced with anger. "I will not be defeated." "It is not about weakness, Aldrich," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It is about wisdom. You have nothing to prove." He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. He seemed to see the genuine concern in her eyes, the love. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Perhaps you are right," he said, his voice softening. "But I am not used to losing." "You did not lose, Aldrich," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "You were challenged, and you will rise again, stronger than before." Her words seemed to reach him, to soothe his wounded pride. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead, his touch lingering. "Thank you, Isolde," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You are a good woman, a strong woman." The tournament was a lie, a spectacle designed to deceive. But it had also revealed truths about Blackwell, about Isolde, about their relationship. It had shown his vulnerability, her strength, and the growing bond between them. The lies of the court had, ironically, brought them closer, revealing the genuine emotions beneath the carefully constructed facades. The competition had exposed weaknesses, but it had also forged a deeper connection, a testament to their resilience and their growing trust in each other. Chapter 13. Secrets Unveiled. The royal commission appointed by the king to investigate the charges against Lord Alaric began its work, but progress was slow, hampered by Lord Valerius's continued interference and the reluctance of witnesses to come forward. Isolde, frustrated by the lack of progress, decided to take matters into her own hands. She had been granted limited access to her father, and during one of her visits, she learned of a hidden cache of documents, letters exchanged between Lord Alaric and other northern lords, that could prove his innocence. The documents were hidden in a secret chamber within Evermere Castle, a chamber known only to a select few. Isolde knew that retrieving these documents was crucial, but it was also a dangerous undertaking. Evermere was now under Valerius's control, and she would be risking her life if she were caught. She confided in Blackwell, seeking his advice, his help. He listened to her plan, his expression grave. "It is too dangerous, Isolde," he said. "Valerius's men are everywhere. You will be caught." "I have to try, Aldrich," she said, her voice determined. "These documents are the only way to prove my father's innocence." He hesitated for a moment, his gaze searching her face. He saw the unwavering resolve in her eyes, the fierce determination to save her father. "Very well," he said, his voice softening. "I will help you. But we must be careful. We must plan this meticulously." They devised a plan, a daring scheme that involved smuggling Isolde into Evermere under the cover of darkness, with the help of a few loyal servants who had remained at the castle. Blackwell would provide a small detachment of his own men, led by Sir Callan, to provide support and protection. The night of the operation was dark and moonless, the perfect conditions for their clandestine mission. Isolde, dressed in a simple, dark cloak, slipped out of Oakhaven with Blackwell and his men, their movements silent and stealthy. They reached Evermere undetected, the familiar walls of her home looming before her like a ghost from the past. The loyal servants, alerted to her arrival, opened a secret passage that led into the castle, bypassing the main gates and the watchful eyes of Valerius's guards. Isolde, guided by one of the servants, made her way through the darkened corridors of her childhood home, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She reached the secret chamber, a small, hidden room behind a tapestry in her father's solar. She found the documents, a collection of letters and scrolls, carefully wrapped in oilcloth and hidden within a locked chest. She quickly gathered them, her hands trembling with relief. But as she was leaving the chamber, she heard voices, the sound of footsteps approaching. Valerius's men had discovered her presence. She was trapped. She quickly extinguished the candle she was carrying, plunging the room into darkness. She hid behind the tapestry, her heart pounding in her chest, praying that they would not find her. The guards entered the solar, their swords drawn, their lanterns casting flickering shadows across the walls. They searched the room, their voices harsh and menacing. "She's here somewhere," one of them said. "Find her." Isolde held her breath, her body pressed against the cold stone wall. She could hear them moving closer, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the corridor. "Intruders!" In the courtyard. It was Sir Callan, creating a diversion, drawing the guards away from the solar. The guards hesitated for a moment, then rushed out of the room, their footsteps fading down the corridor. Isolde emerged from her hiding place, her body shaking with relief. She had to get out of the castle, quickly. She made her way back through the secret passage, her movements swift and silent. She met up with Blackwell and his men in the courtyard, where a fierce skirmish was taking place. Blackwell, seeing her safe, let out a sigh of relief. "Let's go," he said, his voice urgent. They fought their way out of the castle, Blackwell's skill with a sword unmatched. They escaped into the darkness, leaving behind the chaos and confusion of Evermere. They returned to Oakhaven, exhausted but triumphant. Isolde had the documents, the proof of her father's innocence. The secrets had been unveiled, the truth revealed. But the danger was far from over. Valerius would not give up easily, and the battle for her father's freedom was still raging. The successful mission, however, had strengthened the bond between Isolde and Blackwell, their shared risk and triumph forging a deeper connection, a testament to their courage and their growing trust in each other. Chapter 14. The Falcon's Flight. With the recovered documents in hand, Isolde and Blackwell presented them to the Royal Commission. The letters, bearing the seals of various northern lords, clearly demonstrated that Lord Alaric had been acting on the king's orders, attempting to negotiate a peaceful resolution with the rebellious factions. Valerius's accusations were exposed as a fabrication, a blatant attempt to seize Evermere for himself. The commission, faced with this irrefutable evidence, had no choice but to exonerate Lord Alaric. The king, embarrassed by his own gullibility and furious at Valerius's treachery, ordered the immediate release of Lord Alaric and the arrest of Valerius. Isolde, overwhelmed with relief and joy, rushed to her father's side as he was released from his prison cell. They embraced, tears streaming down their faces, the nightmare finally over. Lord Alaric, weakened but alive, looked at Isolde with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "You did it, my daughter," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You saved me." "We did it, father," she said, correcting him gently. "With the help of a friend." She turned to Blackwell, who was standing nearby, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and something else. Something deeper. Something that spoke of a bond forged in adversity, a connection that transcended the boundaries of their initial bargain. Lord Alaric, seeing Blackwell, extended his hand. "Sir Aldrich," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You have saved my life, my honor, my family." Blackwell took Lord Alaric's hand, his grip firm and respectful. "It was my honor, my lord," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Your daughter is a remarkable woman. I was privileged to assist her." The formalities over, the political maneuvering concluded, Isolde found herself facing a new, uncertain future. Her father was free, Evermere was safe, and the bargain she had struck with Blackwell had been fulfilled. But what now? She had come to Blackhaven as a captive, a pawn in a dangerous game. She had surrendered her freedom, her body, her very self, to save her father. But in the process, she had also found something unexpected, something precious. She had found a connection with Blackwell, a bond that had grown from adversity, from shared risk, from mutual respect, and something more. She had seen beneath his armor, glimpsed the man behind the Black Lion, the warrior, the legend. She had seen his vulnerability, his loneliness, his capacity for kindness and compassion. She had fallen in love with him. But what of him? What did he feel for her? He had treated her with tenderness, with respect, with a possessive care that had both angered and thrilled her. He had revealed his past, his pain, his secrets. He had said he needed her, not just for her father, not just for the king, but for himself. But were those just words, spoken in the heat of the moment, a part of the role he had been playing? Or were they genuine, a reflection of his true feelings?
She didn't know,
and she was afraid to ask. As they prepared to leave Oakhaven and return to their respective homes, Isolde found herself torn between her desire to stay with Blackwell and her duty to her father, to her people, to Evermere. She decided to take a risk of rejection. During one last moment alone, she found Blackwell preparing his horse for travel, its sleek black coat mirroring the color of his armor and hair, the animal snorting softly, sensing the change in the air. "Aldrich," she began, approaching him, her voice, at first a mere tremor. He straightened at the sound, the leather of his gloves creaking softly as his hands tightened. Turning, he met her with a gaze that was both intense and questioning. "Isolde? My father, he is going home." To Evermere, she struggled to articulate her thoughts and feelings. I am to go with him." The wind rustled through the nearby trees, the sound of the leaves a whisper against the backdrop of the bustling city, now fading behind them. Blackwell nodded slowly, as it should be. "Your duty is there, with your family." But Isolde hesitated, her hands twisting the fabric of her dress. "What of us? What of what happened here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable. It was a question that stripped away the pretenses, the roles, the carefully constructed facades they had both maintained. Blackwell took a step closer, his eyes searching her face, his expression a mixture of longing and uncertainty. "Isolde," he said, his voice low and husky, "what happened here changed me." "You changed me." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "I came to Oakhaven seeking to use you, to manipulate you, to control you. But you defied me. You challenged me. You saw me for who I truly am." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch sending a shiver through her. "I fell in love with you, Isolde," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "Against my will, against my better judgment, against all the odds. Isolde's heart soared. Her fears, her doubts, her uncertainties vanished, replaced by a wave of joy, of relief, of love. "And you, Aldrich," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I fell in love with you too." He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his features, making him look younger, more human. "Then what are we to do?" he murmured. "Will we return to our old lives and act as though none of this ever happened?"
No.
She replied with newfound courage, fueled by their shared declaration, and then presented her idea. "There's a falcon. My father's favorite, trained to fly between Evermere and Blackhaven. We could use it to send messages," she explained, a shy smile gracing her lips, until we find a way to be together.
Properly.
Blackwell's eyes lit up, a spark of hope, of excitement, flickering within them. He chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent a thrill through her. "A falcon, you say?" he said, his voice filled with amusement and affection. "A fitting messenger for a love born in the midst of lies and intrigue." He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her lips, a kiss of promise, of commitment, of a future together. The falcon's flight would symbolize their connection, their hope, their love, soaring above the obstacles, the distances, the past. It was a beginning, a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with uncertainty, but also with the promise of a love that had defied all odds, a love that had blossomed in the darkness of Blackhaven and the treacherous courts of Oakhaven. Chapter 15. A glimmer of hope. The falcon, a magnificent bird named Shadow, became their lifeline, a winged messenger carrying their hopes, their fears, their growing love across the miles that separated Evermere and Blackhaven. Isolde and Aldrich exchanged letters, pouring out their hearts, sharing their thoughts, their dreams, their plans for a future together. The letters were more than just words on parchment, they were a tangible connection, a reminder that they were not alone, that their love was real, that it could withstand the distance, the obstacles, the past. Isolde found herself blossoming in the aftermath of her ordeal. She was no longer the naive, sheltered noblewoman who had journeyed to Blackhaven in desperation. She had faced danger, deception, and her own inner demons, and she had emerged stronger, more resilient, more alive. She threw herself into the task of rebuilding Evermere, of restoring her father's lands and his reputation. She worked alongside her people, earning their respect and their loyalty, not just as their lady, but as their leader. She also began to implement changes, reforms designed to improve the lives of her people, to create a more just and equitable society. She drew inspiration from Blackwell's leadership, his fierce determination to protect his lands and his people, his willingness to challenge the established order. Aldrich, too, was changing. The letters he received from Isolde, filled with her passion, her intelligence, her love, softened the edges of his hardened heart. He found himself thinking less about war and conquest, and more about peace and prosperity. He began to listen to his advisors, to consider their counsel, to seek compromise rather than confrontation. He also started to make amends for his past actions, to reach out to those he had wronged, to seek reconciliation rather than revenge. He was still the Black Lion, the warrior, the legend, but he was also becoming something more, something better. Their letters also spoke of their longing for each other, their desire to be together, to bridge the distance that separated them. They made plans, secret rendezvous in hidden glades, stolen moments under the cover of darkness. Their meetings were brief, fleeting, but they were enough to sustain them, to fuel their hope, to keep their love alive. They shared kisses, embraces, whispered promises, each encounter strengthening their bond, deepening their commitment. But they also knew that their secret meetings were not enough. They could not live like this forever, sneaking around, hiding their love from the world. They needed to find a way to be together, openly, honestly, without fear of judgment or reprisal. The solution, they realized, lay in marriage. A union between Evermere and Blackhaven, a joining of two powerful houses, a symbol of peace and reconciliation. It was a bold idea, a radical departure from the traditional alliances of the realm, but it was also the only way to secure their future, to ensure their happiness. But there were obstacles, of course. The king, still wary of Blackwell's power, would need to be persuaded. The other northern lords, jealous of Blackwell's influence and suspicious of his motives, would need to be appeased. And Lord Alaric, though grateful to Blackwell for saving his life, might have reservations about his daughter marrying a man with such a formidable reputation. Isolde and Aldrich knew that the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges, but they were determined to overcome them. They had faced adversity before, and they had emerged stronger, their love tempered by fire, their bond unbreakable. They began to work, separately but in concert, to pave the way for their union. Isolde spoke to her father, gently but firmly, persuading him of Blackwell's genuine affection, his changed character, his commitment to their future. Lord Alaric, seeing the love in his daughter's eyes, the strength of her conviction, finally agreed. Aldrich, in turn, began to cultivate relationships with the other northern lords, demonstrating his willingness to cooperate, to compromise, to work for the common good. He used his influence, his reputation, not to intimidate, but to persuade, to build alliances, to forge a path towards peace. The glimmer of hope that had flickered between them in Oakhaven was now burning brighter, stronger, fueled by their love, their determination, their shared vision of a future together. The Falcon's flight continued, carrying their messages of hope, their plans for a union that would not only unite two lovers, but also two powerful houses, paving the way for a new era of peace and prosperity in the realm. The obstacles were many, but their resolve was stronger, their love a beacon guiding them towards their ultimate goal, a life together, openly, honestly, and without fear. Chapter 16. The Gathering Storm. The whispers of a possible union between Isolde of Evermere and Aldrich Blackwell, the Black Lion, spread through the realm like wildfire. It was a prospect that both intrigued and alarmed the various factions of the court. Some saw it as a potential for stability, a merging of two powerful houses that could bring an end to the long-standing feuds of the North. Others viewed it with suspicion, fearing Blackwell's growing influence and the potential threat he posed to the established order. King Oberon, still smarting from his near-fatal misjudgment of Lord Alaric and Valerius's treachery, was hesitant. He summoned Blackwell and Isolde to Oakhaven, ostensibly to discuss the matter of their proposed marriage, but in reality, to assess the situation, to gauge their intentions, to determine whether this union was a genuine alliance or a calculated power play. The journey to Oakhaven was fraught with tension. Isolde and Aldrich traveled separately, each with their own retinue, aware that they were under scrutiny, their every move watched, their every word analyzed. They met in the capital city, their reunion brief and cautious, their public interactions carefully controlled. They knew that they were walking a tightrope, balancing their desire for each other with the need to appease the king, to allay the fears of the court, to navigate the treacherous currents of political intrigue. The meeting with the king was a tense affair. Oberon, surrounded by his advisors, questioned them extensively, probing their motives, challenging their intentions, testing their loyalty. Isolde, drawing on her newfound strength and confidence, spoke eloquently, passionately, about her love for Aldrich, her belief in his changed character, her vision of a future where Evermere and Blackhaven could coexist peacefully, prosperously. Blackwell, in turn, presented a carefully crafted image of a reformed warrior, a man weary of war, eager for peace, committed to serving the king and the realm. He emphasized his loyalty, his willingness to cooperate, his desire to build a better future for his people. But beneath the surface of their carefully constructed facades, the doubts, the fears, the uncertainties remained. They knew that the king's decision was not solely based on their words, their actions, their love. It was also influenced by the machinations of others, by the whispers of his advisors, by the hidden agendas of the various factions vying for power. One advisor in particular, Lord Regulus, seemed particularly opposed to the union. He was a close confidant of the king, a man known for his cunning, his ambition, and his dislike of Blackwell. He whispered doubts in the king's ear, reminding him of Blackwell's past, his ruthlessness, his potential for treachery. Isolde and Aldrich sensed Regulus's hostility, his subtle attempts to undermine their efforts, to sow seeds of discord. They knew that he was a dangerous enemy, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. The king, torn between his desire for stability and his fear of Blackwell's power, remained undecided. He prolonged the discussions, delaying his decision, demanding further assurances, further concessions. The tension in Oakhaven mounted. The various factions of the court maneuvered for position, their whispers and rumors growing louder, their plots and schemes more intricate. Isolde and Aldrich found themselves caught in a web of intrigue, their future hanging in the balance, their love threatened by the machinations of others. They knew that they had to act, to counter Regulus's influence, to expose his treachery, to convince the king that their union was not a threat, but a promise, a hope for a better future. A gathering storm was brewing, a clash of wills, a battle for power, a test of their love. They had to be prepared, to be strong, to be united, if they were to weather the storm and achieve their dream of a life together. The political climate was volatile, the stakes were high, and their future, their love, hung precariously in the balance, threatened by the gathering storm of courtly intrigue and hidden agendas. Chapter 17. Betrayal's Kiss. The tension in Oakhaven reached a fever pitch. Lord Regulus, sensing that the king was leaning towards approving the marriage between Isolde and Aldrich, decided to take drastic measures. He orchestrated a plot, a cunning scheme designed to discredit Blackwell, to paint him as a traitor, to destroy any chance of a union between Evermere and Blackhaven. He planted false evidence, forged letters that implicated Blackwell in a conspiracy with the rebellious northern lords, the very same lords Lord Alaric had been falsely accused of consorting with. He bribed witnesses, coerced testimony, and manipulated events to create a narrative of treachery and betrayal. The king, presented with this evidence, was enraged. He summoned Blackwell to his presence, accusing him of treason, of plotting against the crown, of deceiving him and the court. Blackwell, stunned by the sudden turn of events, denied the accusations vehemently. He protested his innocence, his loyalty, his love for Isolde. But the king, blinded by his anger and swayed by Regulus's machinations, refused to listen. Isolde, witnessing Blackwell's humiliation, his despair, knew that she had to act, to expose Regulus's treachery, to save the man she loved. She had seen Regulus's subtle manipulations, his veiled threats, his hatred of Blackwell. She knew he was behind this, but she needed proof. She sought the help of Alara, Blackwell's loyal attendant, who had become a trusted friend and confidant. Alara, though initially hesitant, agreed to help, her loyalty to Blackwell outweighing her fear of reprisal. Together, they uncovered a trail of evidence, a series of clandestine meetings, secret payments, and forged documents that implicated Regulus in the plot. They discovered that Regulus had been working with Lord Valerius, still in prison but plotting his revenge, to undermine Blackwell and seize control of both Evermere and Blackhaven. Isolde, armed with this evidence, confronted the king, presenting him with the truth, exposing Regulus's treachery. The king, initially skeptical, was eventually convinced by the overwhelming evidence, by Isolde's passionate defense of Blackwell, by her unwavering belief in his innocence. He ordered Regulus's arrest, and the charges against Blackwell were dropped. But the damage had been done. The trust between Blackwell and the king had been shattered, the hope for a peaceful union between Evermere and Blackhaven severely damaged. Blackwell, though exonerated, was deeply wounded by the betrayal, by the king's willingness to believe the lies, by the fragility of his position, by the vulnerability of his love for Isolde. He withdrew, isolating himself, his anger and resentment simmering beneath his carefully controlled exterior. He questioned Isolde's loyalty, her love, wondering if she had been a part of Regulus's plot, if she had used him, manipulated him, to achieve her own goals. Isolde, heartbroken by his accusations, his distrust, tried to reach him, to reason with him, to reassure him of her love. But he refused to listen. His walls rebuilt, his heart hardened. One evening, as she pleaded with him, he turned on her, his eyes filled with a cold fury she had never seen before. "Was it all a lie, Isolde?" he asked, his voice laced with bitterness. "Was our love just a performance, a means to an end?" Isolde, stung by his words, her own anger flaring, retorted, "How dare you, Aldrich? After all we have been through, after all I have sacrificed, you accuse me of treachery?" Their argument escalated, fueled by their mutual pain, their fear, their broken trust. Harsh words were exchanged, accusations hurled, wounds inflicted. In the heat of the moment, Blackwell, driven by his anger and his despair, said the unthinkable. "I should never have trusted you," he said, his voice cold and cutting. "You're just like all the others. A scheming, manipulative woman." Isolde, devastated by his words, her heart shattered, turned and fled, tears streaming down her face. The betrayal's kiss, not of a physical act, but of shattered trust and cruel words, had poisoned their love, their hope, their future. The dream of a life together seemed to be crumbling before her eyes, destroyed by the machinations of others and by the demons within themselves. The bond, once so strong, was now fractured, perhaps irreparably, leaving Isolde with a profound sense of loss and despair. Chapter 18. The Lion's Roar. The rift between Isolde and Aldrich seemed irreparable. Isolde returned to Evermere, heartbroken and disillusioned, the weight of Blackwell's accusations heavy on her soul. She had fought for him, risked everything for him, and he had repaid her with distrust and cruelty. Lord Alaric, seeing his daughter's pain, tried to comfort her, offering words of solace and support. He had always been wary of Blackwell, and now he saw his fears confirmed. He urged Isolde to forget the Black Lion, to move on, to find happiness elsewhere. But Isolde could not. She had given her heart to Aldrich, and despite his betrayal, despite his harsh words, she still loved him. She knew, deep down, that his anger was born of pain, of fear, of a lifetime of betrayal and loss. She understood his demons, even if she could not condone his actions. Meanwhile, at Blackhaven, Aldrich was consumed by regret and remorse. He had lashed out at Isolde, driven by his own insecurities, his own deep-seated fears of abandonment. He had allowed his past to cloud his judgment, to poison his present, to destroy his future. He realized, too late, that he had made a terrible mistake. He had pushed away the one person who had truly seen him, who had loved him for who he was, flaws and all. He had lost her. He tried to reach out to her, sending messages via Shadow, the Falcon, but Isolde refused to respond. She had erected her own walls, her own defenses, protecting her wounded heart from further pain. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them grew, a vast chasm separating two souls who had once been so close. Aldrich, desperate to make amends, to win back Isolde's trust, decided to take a drastic step. He learned of a renewed threat from the rebellious Northern Lords, a coalition of disgruntled factions who were planning to attack Evermere, taking advantage of the perceived weakness of Lord Alaric and the rift between him and Blackwell. Aldrich, despite his anger, despite his heartbreak, knew that he could not stand by and watch Isolde and her people suffer. He had a duty, a responsibility, not just as a lord, but as a man who loved a woman he had wronged. He mustered his forces, gathering his loyal knights and men-at-arms. He rode to Evermere, not as a conqueror, not as a suitor, but as a protector, a defender, a man seeking redemption. He arrived at Evermere just as the Northern Lords launched their attack. The castle was under siege, the defenders outnumbered and outmatched. Lord Alaric, though weakened by his recent imprisonment, fought bravely, but the situation was dire. Then, from the north, came the sound of thundering hooves, the roar of a lion. Blackwell, clad in his black armor, his banner flying high, charged into the fray, his knights a wave of steel and fury. The tide of the battle turned. Blackwell's arrival inspired the defenders, demoralized the attackers. He fought with a ferocity, a skill, that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He cut down his enemies, his sword a blur of motion, his every strike precise and deadly. Isolde, watching from the castle walls, felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Fear, relief, gratitude, and love. She saw him, the Black Lion, the warrior, the man she had given her heart to, fighting for her people, for her home. The battle raged for hours, a brutal clash of steel and blood. But in the end, Blackwell and his forces prevailed. The northern lords were defeated, their rebellion crushed. Blackwell, wounded but victorious, stood amidst the carnage, his armor stained with blood, his face grim but resolute. He had saved Evermere. He had protected Isolde. He had redeemed himself. The lion's roar had echoed across the battlefield, a declaration of his strength, his loyalty, his love. He had proven his worth, not with words, but with deeds, with courage, with sacrifice. The battle had been won, but the true victory was yet to be determined. The reconciliation of two hearts, scarred by betrayal, but still yearning for each other. The roar was a testament to his power, but also a plea for forgiveness, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that separated him from Isolde. Chapter 19. Trials of the Heart. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of both devastation and relief. The wounded were tended to, the dead were mourned, and the castle began the slow process of recovery. Isolde, though grateful for Blackwell's intervention, remained distant, her heart still wounded by his previous accusations. Blackwell, aware of the chasm that separated them, approached her cautiously, his usual confidence replaced by a humility she had rarely seen. He was no longer the arrogant Black Lion, but a man seeking forgiveness, a man desperate to reclaim the love he had so carelessly thrown away. He found her in the Godswood, standing beneath the ancient oak where her mother was buried, the same place where she had bid farewell to her father before her journey to Blackhaven. "Isolde," he said, his voice low and hesitant. I need to speak with you." She turned to face him, her expression guarded, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else. Something that gave him a flicker of hope. "You saved us, Aldrich," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You saved my people, my home. I am grateful." "Gratitude is not what I seek, Isolde," he said, stepping closer, his gaze searching her face. "I seek forgiveness. I was a fool. I let my past, my fears, cloud my judgment. I hurt you, and I am deeply sorry." He paused, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know I don't deserve it, but I still love you, Isolde. More than words can say." Isolde looked at him, her heart aching with a mixture of love and resentment. She wanted to believe him, to forgive him, to take him back into her arms. But the wounds he had inflicted were deep, and the trust that had been shattered was not easily rebuilt. "Your words, they hurt, Aldrich," she said, her voice trembling. "You accused me of treachery, of using you, of not loving you. How can I forget that?" "You cannot," he said, his voice filled with self-reproach. "And I cannot expect you to. But I can show you that I have changed, that I trust you, that I love you, unconditionally." He knelt before her, his head bowed, his hands clasped before him, a gesture of supplication, of humility. "I am at your mercy, Isolde," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do with me as you will. Punish me, reject me, banish me, but please, do not shut me out completely." Isolde looked down at him, her heart torn. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the pain in his voice, the love that still burned within him. She saw the man he truly was, beneath the armor, beneath the scars, beneath the Black Lion. She reached out, her fingers gently touching his cheek, her touch sending a shiver through him. "I do not want to punish you, Aldrich," she said, her voice softening. "I want to understand you. I want to trust you again." He lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers, his gaze filled with a mixture of hope and fear.
"Can you?"
he asked, his voice barely audible. Isolde hesitated for a moment, her heart wrestling with her doubts, her fears. But then, she saw something in his eyes, something that had been missing before. Vulnerability, honesty, a willingness to be open, to be real. She nodded, her tears finally flowing freely. "I can try, Aldrich," she whispered. "I can try." He rose to his feet, taking her in his arms, holding her close, his embrace both a plea and a promise. It was not a perfect reconciliation, not a complete healing. There were still scars, still doubts, still trials to overcome. But it was a beginning. A step towards rebuilding their trust, towards rekindling their love, towards forging a new, stronger bond. The trials of the heart were far from over, but they were facing them together, united by their shared pain, their shared hope, and their enduring love. The forgiveness was tentative, the future uncertain, but the spark of love, once dimmed, was now flickering back to life, fueled by humility, honesty, and a willingness to try. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. The reconciliation between Isolde and Aldrich was a slow, delicate process, a careful rebuilding of trust, a gradual healing of wounds. They spent their days together at Evermere, working side by side to restore the castle and its lands, to heal the divisions that had been sown by conflict and betrayal. They spoke openly, honestly, about their fears, their doubts, their past. Aldrich shared more of his history, his struggles, his demons. Isolde, in turn, revealed her own vulnerabilities, her own insecurities, her own lingering pain. Their conversations were not always easy. There were moments of tension, of disagreement, of tears. But there were also moments of understanding, of empathy, of love. They were learning to communicate, to truly listen to each other, to bridge the gap that had separated them. Lord Alaric, witnessing their reconciliation, his initial reservations gradually fading, offered his blessing. He saw the genuine affection between them, the strength of their commitment, the healing power of their love. He realized that Blackwell was not the monster he had feared, but a man capable of change, a man worthy of his daughter's love. The news of their reconciliation and their intention to marry spread through the realm, prompting a mix of reactions. Some celebrated the union, seeing it as a symbol of peace and stability. Others remained skeptical, wary of Blackwell's power and suspicious of his motives. King Oberon, however, finally gave his approval, recognizing the potential benefits of a strong alliance between Evermere and Blackhaven. He had learned a valuable lesson from his past mistakes, and he was now willing to trust Blackwell, to believe in the power of love and redemption. The wedding was a grand affair, a celebration of love, of forgiveness, of new beginnings. It was held at Evermere, in the very courtyard where Isolde had first pleaded with Blackwell for his help, a poignant reminder of their journey, their struggles, their triumph. Isolde, dressed in a gown of white and silver, her hair adorned with flowers, looked radiant, her eyes shining with happiness, her heart filled with love. Aldrich, clad in a tunic of black and crimson, his usual stern expression softened by a smile, looked proud and humbled. They exchanged their vows before family, friends, and allies, their words ringing with sincerity, with commitment, with hope. They promised to love each other, to honor each other, to support each other, through all the trials and tribulations that life might bring. As they kissed, a cheer went up from the assembled guests, a celebration of their union, a testament to their love, a blessing for their future. The reckoning of love and duty had been achieved. Isolde had fulfilled her duty to her father, to her people, to her home. And she had also found love, a love that had been tested by fire, a love that had survived betrayal, a love that had emerged stronger, more resilient, more profound. Aldrich had fulfilled his duty to protect Evermere, to redeem himself, to win back Isolde's trust. And he had also found love, a love that had healed his wounds, a love that had transformed him, a love that had given him a new purpose, a new hope. Their journey had been long and arduous, filled with obstacles, with challenges, with pain. But it had also been a journey of growth, of transformation, of love. They had found each other, lost each other, and found each other again, their bond strengthened by adversity, their love deepened by forgiveness. The future was still uncertain. There would be new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But they were ready to face them together, united by their love, their commitment, their shared destiny. The reckoning had been made, the balance achieved, and their love, forged in the crucible of conflict and betrayal, was now a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of forgiveness, a promise of a future filled with happiness, with peace, and with enduring love. Epilogue. Years passed, and the union of Evermere and Blackhaven proved to be more than just a political alliance. It was a testament to the enduring power of love and forgiveness. Isolde and Aldrich ruled together, not as lord and lady, but as partners, their strengths complementing each other, their love a constant source of strength and inspiration. Evermere flourished, its lands restored, its people thriving. Isolde's wisdom and compassion, combined with Aldrich's strength and strategic acumen, brought an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity to the region. Blackhaven, too, underwent a transformation. The once feared fortress became a symbol of hope, a beacon of justice and protection. Aldrich, tempered by Isolde's influence, ruled with a firm but fair hand, earning the respect and loyalty of his people. Their love deepened with each passing year, their bond unbreakable, their commitment unwavering. They had children, a son and a daughter, who inherited the best qualities of both their parents, Isolde's kindness and intelligence, Aldrich's courage and determination. The falcon, Shadow, continued to fly between Evermere and Blackhaven, a symbol of their enduring connection, a reminder of their journey, their struggles, their triumph. But the messages it carried were no longer filled with fear and uncertainty, but with love, with laughter, with the everyday joys and sorrows of a family. One evening, as the sun set over the Evermere Sea, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Isolde and Aldrich stood on the castle walls, their arms around each other, their children playing at their feet. They looked out at the horizon, at the vast expanse of the sea, at the future that stretched before them, a future filled with hope, with promise, with love. "We did it, Aldrich," Isolde whispered, her voice filled with contentment. "We overcame it all." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "We did, my love," he said, his voice low and tender. "Together." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss of gratitude, of devotion, of enduring love. A kiss that sealed their journey, their triumph, their forever. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the trials they had endured, the battles they had fought, the love they had found. But the scars were also a testament to their resilience, their strength, their ability to heal and to forgive. They had built a life together, a family, a legacy, based on love, on trust, on a bargain struck in blood, but redeemed by forgiveness, by understanding, by a love that had conquered all. They had found their happily ever after, not in a fairy tale, but in the real world, a world of conflict and compromise, of struggle and triumph. Their love story was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, the ability to overcome adversity, to forgive, to heal, and to love unconditionally.